Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. On our special Thinkers series, I'm very honored to be joined by Professor Sugata Bose. He is, of course, a senior scholar, historian. He's also the Gardner Professor of Oceanic Affairs and History at Harvard University. Thank you very much for joining me, Professor Bose.
It's wonderful to be with you.
The world is currently going through turbulent times, geopolitical conflict, technological advances where the predictions are that which will completely change the world and working as we know it. Do you think, when you look at history, how would you look at the current phase that the globe is going through?
This is indeed a very turbulent time in global history. We are in the midst of two major wars. One, of course, between Russia and Ukraine, the other in the Middle East. And also, you're absolutely right, technology is changing our world. We are not yet sure how we are going to deal with the challenge of artificial intelligence. But as a historian, I must say that there have been other eras of terrible conflict. If you look back on the first half of the 20th century, there were two devastating world wars. But that same period was also an era when there were independence movements in Asia and Africa. So ultimately, I think there were some positive outcomes going through a period of terrible conflict. But I am concerned about today's world. There seems to be the rise of narrow nationalism, bordering on chauvinism, and we need to somehow recover from our past more generous conceptions of patriotism and cosmopolitanism. Even as a historian, I have to say that we are trying to negotiate the challenge of accepting or rejecting the new technologies. And it's a particular challenge for those of us who are in the humanities. Mm-hmm. But even as a university professor, I can see that the younger generation, the students, are really being roiled by geopolitical conflicts of the day and uncertain technological transformations that are on our way.
In fact, American university campuses, we saw a great deal of, between the students and, say, management. You've seen very prominent heads of universities actually have to step down as a fallout. Why do you think, in a sense, that whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's what's currently happening in the Middle East, that almost in a sense, the vast majority of populations, or perhaps unlike earlier, will feel that it's their war, it's not ours. And you see students protest, but even those have been in what some would derisively say the liberals or the woke are the people who are getting involved in this. Why is it now seen that liberalism and wokeism especially is something that you see on university campuses and on political discourse is something which is often derided?
I don't necessarily think that it's just the quote-unquote liberals who are protesting. Mm-hmm. In fact, I believe that the hypocrisy of Western liberalism has been in full view over the past year or two. Complete double standards in addressing the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the one in Israel-Palestine. In fact, it is the younger generation, our students, who have given us hope. They seem to have been the only ones with a conscience. And they have been protesting, I think, in very mature ways. If anything, we have gone through a turbulent year at Harvard and also at other universities. Unfortunately, I've always been very proud of US higher education, but I have noted a process of crass corporatization. And there are university administrations which are a little too beholden to rich donors. And that's why even when students protested respectfully, you know, when young people see constantly on their new technological devices horrific scenes of innocent women and children being killed, they are stirred, they are moved, and very respectfully, you know, they established university encampments. I have to say that at Harvard, the administration at least did not call in the police. The faculty voted to award degrees to all students who had completed their academic requirements, and a dozen of them were denied degrees in May for taking part in what were peaceful protests. But that's why I think there's a lot of turmoil in the universities, but the more far-sighted faculty members, the more aware students who are concerned about what's going on in the rest of the world, are beginning to make their voices heard. So that I see as the only hope in a world riven with conflict and violence.
Interestingly, you talked about the hypocrisy of Western liberalism, but isn't it a fact that liberalism as a philosophy is under attack in many parts of the world? And perhaps it's the best qualities of liberalism, which some would say that the worst advertisement has become liberals themselves in the terms of very strong positions taken on say, political systems which don't agree with them. Do you think that there is some merit to that argument? Fareed Zakaria talks about in the age of revolution, that why is it that increasingly it's seen as a liberal elite which is out of touch with what, say, the common people want, which is why perhaps populist figures like ex-President Trump is seen as in with a good chance in the US elections?
You know, I have always had a trouble with that particular definition of liberalism, because liberalism has always been tainted by the history of imperialism. So there was a time when we as a country were not free, when there would be British thinkers who would be liberals at home. They would promote democracy at home. But there was always the rule of colonial difference that did not apply to the colonies. And that's why even many Indian thinkers, political leaders who had a certain liberality of mind, they did not like to be tagged with the label liberal because of its association with imperialism. But I can understand where you are coming from. Particularly in the United States of America, liberals see themselves as the good, and their opponents see the L word as almost a term of abuse now. And that's because, as you say, it seemed to be elitist, that people are cut off from the concerns of common people, ordinary people. And there is something to that. There is a very strong segment of the working class which is supporting Donald Trump. A businessman, some would say a failed businessman, but who is extremely rich and so on. But because they feel that the so-called liberal elite have not been concerned about their fate, they are turning towards Trump. And yet, I think that there are some values that need to be protected. I see myself more as a social democrat these days, but think of the United States of America. If it is that the so-called liberals are fighting for or trying to promote reproductive freedoms, which have been taken away by Trump-appointed Supreme Court, then I think those values are worth fighting for. But in the United States of America, there is a very strong body of opinion which does not want aid to be going to Ukraine.
Yes. In fact, Interesting, your current book on Asia after Europe, and really looking now at the global power shifts as we're talking. It very much seems to be going towards Asia. We've already seen that India is now on the list of the top 10 great powers, likely to be US, China, India coming up, just also because the size of its population. It will soon be the most populous country, soon to be the third largest economy. How do you see the power shift that is going, and where would you place the context of Asia rising versus Europe now?
I think there has been a dramatic shift in the balance of global power from Euro-America towards Asia. And in my book, Asia After Europe, I have traced the long history of this shift. Asia, for example, in economic terms, was not poor. There is nothing ancient about Asia's poverty. Asia became poor and Europe and America became rich from about, I would say, the early 19th century onwards. We are talking about a 200-year period. And then in the course of the 20th century, there is a long struggle for Asia to recover its lost position, both in economic and political terms, but as I try to show in my book, even in cultural terms. And so what I show is a clear shift in the balance of economic and political power towards Asia. Historically, I think that is going to be marked as extremely significant. Mm-hmm. But I also try to show something else, that there were some very fascinating conversations taking place among Asians. Mm-hmm. Political leaders, of course, but also intellectuals and artists. They were constantly talking to one another when Asia was trying to recover its lost glory. What we have to be careful about is not falling into the trap of European-style nationalist conflicts. Asia could do better. There was a history of Asian solidarity during our freedom struggles. But unfortunately, since the nation state has become the form that we have tended to adopt, we too risk the danger of falling into European-style nationalist conflicts. So I hope that the more far-sighted, creative, innovative thinkers of an Asian future will be able to guide our continent in a proper way so that we are able to avoid the pitfalls into which Euro-America seem to have fallen.
It's interesting, of course, you're here talking about colonial nationalism. And at this point, we've seen that India has, of course, surpassed the United Kingdom. In terms of economy, there's talk of reform of the UN Security Council. Some have said that, in fact, the UK should surrender its seat, UK and France, for India. I mean, that, of course, is wishful thinking.
Nobody will surrender
anything. But the fact that with the new power dynamic, that we've seen that, in a sense, India and other countries also, the African Union emerging, has actually turned the tables, as it were, on its once colonial masters. How do you see that as a historian? How do you see this whole development?
I think that, it is a very positive development on the whole. All that I would say is that our best anti-colonial thinkers did not want to imitate the worst features of European territorial nationalism. And I came to Delhi this time to give the sort of inaugural speech at the curtain raiser of the IIC festival, and I was asked to speak on anti-colonial nationalism. And the argument that I made was that our best thinkers, leaders, intellectuals, artists, musicians always believed that cosmopolitanism and patriotism could be compatible. They were not antagonistic. And that's why we need a somewhat generous and imaginative conception of our nationalism today. We should be a bit careful about not letting our nationalism slide into a kind of chauvinism, simply because we have achieved certain successes. And one of the things that I would say about India is that you know, we have legitimate global ambitions. We want to play an important role on the global stage. But we also need to have some way of having better relations with all our neighbors. We cannot allow that to hamper the pursuit of our global ambitions. And I'm a bit concerned that our relationships with all our smaller neighbors is none too good. And we also need to take some initiatives to make sure that the relationships with the bigger neighbors, as it were, can be improved, can at least be addressed in some meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Finally, of course, Professor Bose, you were also MP in India's very vibrant and democracy for 5 years. One of the issues, and coming from West Bengal, I'm sure that is something that hurt you as well, was what happened recently with that young woman doctor, and the feeling that as much as India progresses, this is something which needs to really be almost a national movement about the horrible sexual crimes against women. What do you think we can do to address that? And in a city like Kolkata, a city where, you know, working women are given such a strong position here from really historically, what do you think can be done? And did that pain you to see what happened and the responses to it as well?
Yes, I agree with you. We need a new national movement to ensure both the freedom of women and the security of women. There was a West Bengal government bureaucrat who responded in a most absurd way that we are not going to send women to work after 8 p.m. I think even the Supreme Court has censured that kind of a policy. I was, heartbroken when the news came of this talented young woman doctor, her life being snuffed out in her workplace, which should have been a safe place for her. But I think all good thinking people, and the most heartening part of the protests that took place from August onwards was that women came out into the streets with men in a supportive role. And I think we need to, build those movements and somehow have those movements influence, our politics and society. Yes. I mean, you mentioned that I served as a member of parliament in the 16th Lok Sabha. But I think there are ways to play a role in public life, even without being embroiled in party politics. So, I hope that it is a time for all of us to be active citizens. Active citizenship is the need of the hour. And I hope that will tend towards, a better quality of democratic politics in our country.
Professor Bose, thank you so much for being on the NDTV Dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you.